to Customer Transformation Live. Buckle up as we tap into transformative conversations, real-world case studies, and innovative solutions that are shaping the future of customer engagement. Your journey to customer transformation starts now. Welcome to the show. Glad everybody is tuning in. Orly, would you mind introducing yourself?
Hey, Chris. Thanks for having me on your show, first of all. So my name is Orly Zeewy. I'm the author of the book Ready Launch Brand, the Lean Marketing Guide for Startups. I also have a consulting practice called Zeewy Brands, and I work primarily with solopreneurs, coaches, consultants to help them basically cut through the noise and stand out in this crazy over-messaged world that we live in, and attract their ideal clients so they can grow their business.
Overly messaged world is probably a really good place for us to start. We're sitting here trying to do a live broadcasting amongst probably thousands of live.
Chris, I'm sorry, I've lost your sound. I can barely hear you.
Oh,
there we go. Oh, that's better.
Good. Okay.
Now I can hear you. Yeah.
One of the areas that I would like to touch on with you is you talk about your audience and you're working with solopreneurs and coaches. Is there a difference between messaging in general when we look at whether it's a new business or maybe a larger enterprise business?
So that's a great question. And I didn't want to get into all of the things I do because, that takes too much time. But I actually work with organizations also from everything from pre-startup to established company. And here's what they all have in common. They don't know how to succinctly sum up what they do in such a way that they can attract more of their ideal clients. Their messaging, it starts with, do you understand who you are, what you offer, and who it matters to? So that's the same whether you're a big company or a startup.
And can we summarize maybe what are some of the key things that matter to individual organizations? Like from my perspective, and of course it's based on the theme of the show, customer will always be first and foremost at the forefront of what you're trying to accomplish. But when we extract that and we say, okay, everybody has customers, what are some of the other areas that people really have to focus in on when developing that brand messaging?
So here's and this is really a great place to begin, right? So here's the thing. Understanding who your customer is not enough. You have to understand what is the key thing that is keeping them up at night. And for every business, for every customer, it's different. And part of the problem with messaging in general is that people tend to try to talk to everybody. And that never works because you're actually trying to attract more of your ideal clients. So the goal is to build that trust-like factor and to get people to understand what they're getting from you that they're not getting from someone else.
Yeah, you've got to reiterate this because I think there's a lot of people out there, especially in the marketing realm, who are thinking the more people I bring in, the better. Right. And I don't necessarily think that's the case. You can't just toss a net and just grab a bunch of people. I think you're wasting your time, resources, and energy, especially when those customers are not the right customers for you.
And you know what? Again, this is such an excellent point because it's one of the things that I spent a lot of time in the research for my book. I will tell you, one of the founders I spoke to, they spent, I forget how many years building their business, and they were messaging the wrong thing to the wrong people, and they ended up closing their business. So yeah, it's really critical because the other thing, people always say, well, I don't want to leave people out. And here's the thing. It's actually a good thing to leave people out because you really don't want to be working with the whole world. You want to be working with people who value what you offer. They value your work. They value the solution you provide. And because they value it, they're willing to pay a premium for it.
I think the other side of this is from an entrepreneurial perspective or a startup company, even a solopreneur, you care about every single possible lead or
Right.
opportunity. And
Yep.
sometimes we bend our rules, our own rules, because we're like, well, I'll tell them what they need to hear because I'm desperate for a customer and I'll take any customer. But I would argue even that sometimes is not worth your effort.
I couldn't agree more. I know it's hard when you're, especially when you're starting the business or when you're struggling, to think, well, I just want to keep the lights on. I just want to get people in, as many people as possible. The problem with that is that you also end up with people who actually are not a good fit. And then it takes you kind of on a side journey, and you end up having to kind of walk that back. And eventually you find yourself split in all these different ways because you haven't really identified who that ideal client is.
Now, I was listening to another podcast that you were on just to get some insights into your mindset, and I fast forwarded and landed on an awesome segment. And it's not because of what you said; it's because of the topic, which was around donuts, and I love donuts. So I was like, okay, I'm going to bring donuts up here into the conversation. Um, but your story was around how there are donut shops on every corner. And literally, I live in Southern California, and there's probably 10 donut shops in this immediate area. I've been to all of them. I know what all of them are like. Again, that's because of my craving for donuts. But your point is that it's not about the donut. It becomes the differentiation that you have to figure out in
Right.
order to be successful. Can you elaborate a little bit more on that? Only because I like donuts.
Yeah, no, that's funny. I live in, outside of Philadelphia, lots of donut shops here. So, so here's the thing, you can't talk about price because that's a dead end, right? That's a non-starter. So what's left? Is it, you might think about, maybe you have a recipe that comes from the old country, or maybe, you use a different type of oven, or maybe it's the toppings, or, pick something that, and also you may want to think about, who's your clientele, because families are a lot different than Gen Zers, right? I mean, so you want to really be thinking about the audience. And, I always start with the audience, because for me, if it doesn't connect with the audience, then really it lands flat, right? You want to, it's not about just saying a bunch of stuff and hoping somebody hears it. It's about saying a few things that are the right things. And again, if you're talking about family, like, here's one thought, right? You could say, I can get you in and out of here in 15 minutes, or we've got a place for kids to play. I mean, think about McDonald's, right? They built all that stuff for kids so that the parents could eat uninterrupted. One funny thing I wanted to mention about that, McDonald's, I don't know if you know this, but their original color scheme, the red and the yellow, that was really intentional, because those two colors make you want to scream and get out of there as fast as possible. And that was the idea. Like, they actually wanted people to eat and go. And so they created environments that were totally not set up for hanging out and spending a lot of time there. So you might think about your decor as well, but there's always something that sets you apart. Even if there are 20 donut shops, there's something about yours that's different. Maybe you call it something else too.
Yeah. This comes full circle already, in that there's a donut shop that's down the street from me. And a couple of months ago, I walked in, and on the top shelf, they had all new types of donuts. And these were all these crazy donuts with, cookies on top and
Right.
sour things and, shapes in different ways, like massive. They had at least 10 different types of, we'll call them gourmet donuts. A
Right.
month later, I walked in, none of them are there anymore. Why? Well, because wrong clientele, the people who were actually going into that donut shop weren't interested in these fancy donuts. They were charging too much for them. And they realized after their experiment, it wasn't going to work. They didn't recognize who their audience was. They were simply trying to compete against another donut shop that was down the street who was doing the same thing. And this is what you're saying. You've got to differentiate yourself. You can't just try to replicate somebody because they're doing something well. What is going to make you different? And more importantly, what does your customers who are actually there want from you?
So, that brings up a really important point. Why not ask them? Here's a crazy thought, right? So, you can have a simple 3-question survey at the door and have people fill it out while they're waiting for their donut. What's one thing you wish our donut shop had? What's one thing you've had that you've loved? One thing that you've hated? Just get feedback. I mean, people are always so like, they think it's like some magical thing that they're going to hear and it's going to change everything. If you want to know what your clients want, what they're thinking, ask them.
Oh, it's amazing you said that to me, because that's always one of the things I say on all of the podcasts I'm on is like, just ask. I
Just
wrote
ask.
it in my book. I have a story. I'll share it very, very quickly. But in my book, I share an experience where I was consulting with an executive who was operating an online clothing boutique, and a lot of people were abandoning their carts. And the CEO came to me and said, "Well, I think we should change the checkout process." And I'm like, "Well, how do you know that that's the problem?" He said, "Well, have you asked them? Have you asked your customers why they're abandoning the cart?" So we put together a form. We got all the responses back. The number one response was that the cost of the product was too much. It was more expensive than they had anticipated. And so I said, maybe have you thought about changing your prices? And the CEO responded like, well, I don't believe the results. Let's change the checkout process. And
I love that.
a
Oh
few
my
months later, they went out of business.
God.
And this is an example of
Exactly.
you're not asking your customers. And then when you do, you're ignoring what your customers say. Two big critical issues.
That's right. It reminds me actually one of the stories in my book. I've highlighted eight founder stories because they each relate to a myth of marketing around marketing. And this was a pediatrician who, she did everything right. I mean, it's like an example of exactly what to do. First of all, she spent quite a bit of time figuring out the location. Then once she figured out the location, she found that mom that knows everybody and made sure that there were lots of strollers, right? It was a booming area for new families. And then she literally had one-on-one coffee, tea, what have you, just chats with moms and their kids and asked them all these questions. And then she actually did what they said. Because one of the responses she got was, I've got other kids, I bring them in, they've got nothing to do, they're bored. Could we have a blackboard with colored chalk so my kid, right? And the other thing is, by the time she opened, and she spent about 6 months on this, she already had all these clients because they had already met her and there was already the trust-like factor. So some version of that is really what you need to do if you want to make sure, again, it's, you're solving a problem. Is it the right problem? You're solving it for someone. Is it someone who actually has that problem and doesn't have a workaround, but is actually looking for a solution? And finally, are they willing to pay for it?
Yeah. Going back to this concept of the difference in branding or approaches and messaging between entrepreneurs, startup enterprises, that asking part, and the CEO or an entrepreneur who can sit down, has the flexibility to sit down and actually talk with the customers, get feedback. We know that as the company gets larger, that goes away. They may still be doing promotions or
Mhm.
surveys of some form, but that connection from the executive level with the customers often goes away. And I
Right.
think it's so important that that is maintained in some way.
Well, so that is an that happens a lot, right? Especially, because whatever, that becomes a culture issue, right? In the early days, who everybody is. There isn't a huge line to get to the CEO, everybody kind of, right? And as things get bigger, the challenge is, how do you then stay on top of what's happening out there and internally too, so that people feel connected. And so So one of the ways to do that is to really make sure that when you get feedback from everyone at all different levels. I think a lot of times as companies get bigger, they think, well, we'll just talk to our marketing people, or we'll just talk to our salespeople. And the reality is, and I'm thinking of brands like Nordstrom's, which is really looking at, I mean, they empower all their employees. They're each given a certain amount of money so they don't have to ask, they can just take care of their customers. But that idea that, everyone has something to contribute. Now, that doesn't mean that, the janitor tells you how to run your business, but what you want to see is, do I understand like my role in the business? Do I understand how the business operates? And, instead of having all these core values and a big mission statement on the wall somewhere, really understand why people are here. As it gets bigger, the why I'm here is just as important as why they buy.
A story just popped into my mind when you're talking about missions on the wall. I was doing a workshop with another company and they had some, goals, mission on the wall, a couple of bullet points. I took a picture of that and then we had a break. After the break, I put the picture up on the, on the screen and I said, you guys should focus on this. You should accomplish this. Most of the people in the audience said, yeah, this looks good. We should do this. I said, it's on the wall around the corner. And
Oh
and
my
they
God.
didn't even recognize it, right? So to your point, I'm glad you talked about culture because I think the other area, and you touched on it a little bit here, how critical is it that customer success and specifically the brand and the mission, maybe we want to say, but more importantly, I think the brand is understood by the entire organization.
I think it's critical because what happens is, especially as you get larger, it's easy to get kind of sidelined, or everybody's in their little not tunnel, but where everybody's in a different lane and they don't overlap. And so having an understanding of how my role aligns with the vision of the company or the mission of the company. Do I understand, and thinking also in terms of how I describe it, right? Because if you're not engaged, if you don't feel like your job matters, you start to disassociate. And once that happens, you start to lose good people, typically. So that goes to retention and also attracting top talent.
I think, you were talking swim lanes.
Yeah.
If there's also this time where you might have an idea, you might think, hey, how about if we do this? Or, the Nordstrom's example is good on this. But you're told, stay in your lane. You're actually discouraged for trying to help the organization and to maintain that brand. And that's also part of the culture.
Hmm. Well, everybody wants to be entrepreneurial until they understand what that means. I love how companies is, yeah, we want to be really entrepreneurial. Well, to do that, are you giving people, blue ocean time so they can think of ideas? I mean, Google actually sets time aside for their employees to do that, right? I mean, are you encouraging failure as a way to get results, or because you can't talk about that kind of culture if you don't put into place the things that make that culture thrive.
You know, I I I'm literally just finishing up a companion version to my book. So my book Customer Transformation,
Yeah.
I've written a companion guide for nonprofits specifically. Now, I'm going to bring back McDonald's into the conversation because I was just watching the movie The Founder a few weeks ago, and that's all about how Ray Kroc came
Ray
in,
Kroc, right.
took over McDonald's from the McDonald's brothers. But the section I focused on was around franchising. The McDonald's brothers did
Yes.
not want to franchise. Ray Kroc convinced them of doing it, but the challenge was all of the franchises wanted to do their own thing. Being able to maintain control across the
Yeah.
different areas of the brand was challenging. And again, I assume that larger organizations have this problem, like Coca-Cola, McDonald's still, but there are tight regulations in that process to, again, try to maintain the brand.
Right.
And then we build a community, and then we build followers of that brand. We build loyal, fans who are constantly. Starbucks obviously has a lot of fans to it,
Right.
right? Um,
Brand evangelist.
yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. But I find it interesting because as you grow and you try to establish that brand identity across either your fan base or out definitely today in social media, it seems like it's becoming increasingly hard to maintain that integrity, right? And as it gets expanded, do we see that brand being diluted in some way as a result of, lack of control?
You're asking a couple different questions, right?
Yeah,
Because
I
okay, so
am.
yeah, just making sure that I was hearing that there's more than one questions here. So the idea, so franchises are, that's a very specific animal. It doesn't work if everything is not according to the book, because the whole point is wherever you go, you have the same experience. So that's, I think, critical to make sure that there's sort of a level that you can expect that any McDonald's you're going to go into, to use McDonald's as an example. But then the other issue is, when it's a company and not a franchise, then it's really about, what kind of, what is the core value here? Do I want this to be an environment where we can learn and grow from other people and it's not set in stone? Because especially, I would say, millennials and Gen Zers and whatever the next one is, I forget now the name. Is it Gen X? I don't know. That was earlier. But they want to contribute. So there's also this other piece, which is, how do you invite people to contribute without completely falling off the rails, right? Because you can't have people constantly, look, we have a train, and this is the train, right? It doesn't suddenly become a bus or a go-kart, right? So you also have to understand kind of what you've built, which is, again, why it's so important to have that established. As even if you haven't done it from the beginning, it has to be done at some point, so people know what they're buying into. And that also then attracts the right people, to take that bus analogy, get the right people on your bus. So that's, so that's a kind of different situation, where I think it's more about making sure that that there is an environment where people can talk about things, but not necessarily deviate from what the core of the business is.
Have you worked with anybody who has attempted a brand change?
Well, by a brand change, what do you mean by that? Are you talking
Uh,
about visually, or the whole company has like completely shifted direction?
Yeah, I mean, I'm trying to think. Even myself, I'm sitting here trying to think of any major organizations that
Yeah.
have gone through some sort of significant brand or identity change. Obviously, a lot of companies get acquired and you merge, and so there's some
Right.
transitions there. But I'm just wondering if you've worked with anybody who has, we talk often about developing that brand strategy and identity at the start of the business, but what happens if it's not working? A year later, you're like, I think we need to adjust something here. How do they go about that?
So one of the things that I do, and I did a lot of these pre-pandemic, there's always like pre-COVID, uh, but it's really around making sure that we are all on the same page about what this brand is, coming up with the key messages so we understand kind of how we want to promote ourselves. But I can give you an example, because I did this with a nonprofit. So they were seeing themselves as a local nonprofit that was all about education, and they covered education from K through post college. I mean, they had schools and programs, And what was happening is that because they were so focused on the education piece, their website was just one redundancy after another. It was the same stuff over and over again. So one of the ways that I help them kind of rethink this is to realize that they are actually a community that uses education to basically change the world, right? It's like a spark. They're the spark, that kind of. So education is not, it's not about education. It's about education as the tool to make that kind of change. So that shift was a huge shift for them because, first of all, they started to see themselves as a national brand, not as a local one. Mm-hmm. And they also started, I helped them to really rethink, like, all of these different offerings could all be, instead of having a site for each one and, all these different pieces that, establish what this thing is. And then you have these extensions, which are these different learning education modules. And so that, I think, what I enjoyed about that process is getting them to see how they were using education instead of education being the face of the business. It was the catalyst of the business.
Yeah. I love those simple mindset shifts.
Mm-hmm. No, they're not
look
so
at it
simple.
alone different.
They're not so simple. I'm making it sound really simple, but the truth of the matter is, and I had like 30 people. We did a day-long retreat workshop, and I was getting feedback from all these people ahead of time. It was a whole process. But the thing that's so interesting to me is, a lot of, especially nonprofits, a lot of them tend to think small, and they tend to think local instead of thinking, how can we, because if you're a nonprofit and you're trying to do something really amazing in the world, you want to impact more people. And so I think that's a big mind shift. Once you shift that, then other things can happen.
Yeah. I love that. Share a little bit more about your book.
What would you like to know?
Well, give us a summary. Like, where did you come up with the idea? What is it all about?
Yeah. So, okay. So I'll just give a very brief, like, personal piece, which is I'm the daughter of, I actually come from a long line of entrepreneurs on my father's side. And my father was an entrepreneur his whole career, and often not successful. I know. Sorry, Dad. He's long retired now. Brilliant man, has like 17 patents. He was really an inventor. But going through that process as part of a family really impacted me. And so one of the things of course, and we all know this, that the rate of failure of startups is very high. Somewhere like 9 out of 10 will eventually fail. By year 5, 7 out of 10 will fail. And since marketing is such an important aspect, because obviously, as you know, marketing is the engine to sales. So that really impacted me. And I spent the last 20 years literally building this process for startups. And I unpacked my whole process so that each chapter also has the exercise that goes with it. So how do you come up with a name? Talk about the identity, the logo, talk about the website, talk about social media. And really think in terms of, how do I build a brand experience that is seamless, that is, that I understand. And anyway, then of course the founder stories, which all had some really interesting feedback in terms of their marketing experience. One of the founders I interviewed, and it's to this day still my favorite quote, he said, that their logo didn't work, and they'd had the logo for like 10 years. And they decided to change it because they felt that it didn't get to the heart of their brand. And so, as he put it, we gave ourselves a heart transplant. And when they did that, they came up with a new logo that was, of course, they did all the work, because remember, the logo is just shorthand for the brand. So you need to understand what's beneath that, right? What is it representing? So once they understood all of that, then the logo really shifted to really truly represent their true brand. And he said, when the logo launched, it was like immediately became memorable, and no one remembered a logo that had been around for 10 years.
Hmm. Yeah, I love the idea of having those founder stories in your book
Mhm.
and getting insights of what people who have actually gone through that process are
Right.
thinking about. Because even when I was writing my book, I share a lot of stories, but it's the stories that really bring to life what people are trying to do, what works, what doesn't work,
Exactly.
and they're often the areas where those light bulbs go off. Although I've had meetings as well where I've shared stories in the meetings, and somebody would say, "Yeah, but that's not us. That's not what we're doing." I'm like,
People tend to be very literal.
"Yeah, you're missing the point. You're
Kind of
missing
are,
the point."
yeah. Yeah. So
And
yeah, and I did ask each founder to give advice, and only one of the founders was a marketing person, and theirs, of course, was the most successful because, and the reality is that for most people, they think of marketing as an expense instead of an investment. And that was the other reason why I wrote this book and why I wanted to put this book out there. I was hoping to change some mindsets around that, because by the time, and you'll appreciate this, another thing you hear a lot is, well, we'll pay for marketing when we have money to pay for marketing. Which I love that, because
yeah,
marketing is how you get more money.
yeah,
So people think in terms of this pie, and we're a startup, so we have a little pie, and we're just going to spend a little sliver of that on marketing. But the truth is, you should be spending in the beginning probably 15% of gross. Nobody's spending that, but ongoing at least 10%. And the problem is, by the time they wait till they think they're ready for marketing, they've lost so much kind of precious time to really build brand awareness and brand loyalty, and all the things that are actually going to help them grow their business.
yeah, yeah, yeah. I could not agree more with that one. It's always an afterthought, which is
Always.
incredible to me, right? Like, you're focused so much on the
Yeah.
product and what you're building, the ideas, and marketing is the last thought, and how you're going to actually then sell this, you know.
Right. Well, and so I don't know if you know that what the number one reason that startups fail.
No,
I can
no,
give you the
I
top.
haven't looked at recent stats. I
Yeah.
haven't.
So I don't know these. I don't think it's changed. I've looked for it, but I haven't seen anything different. But so the top three, the number one is no market need.
Mm,
And that
yeah,
makes total
yeah,
sense to me,
totally.
because, right, if you haven't spent the time figuring out, like, you can have the best idea in the world, but if nobody wants it, or you haven't thought about, and that's, I think, to your point about marketing, you want to think about positioning it in such a way that I'm solving a need that I absolutely know is critical. And again, people will pay for it. And not surprising, the number two reason is run out of cash. But the interesting one for me, the third one, is the wrong team. And I believe that
Mm,
the reason that there's the wrong team is because if you haven't clarified who you are, if you haven't really identified your core value, if you haven't really figured out kind of what's your North Star, how do you bring people in who are aligned with that, right?
yeah,
And you see that all the time with founders who, they have a falling out because they came in thinking different things, because they didn't do that work ahead of time, to really clarify that. So I keep coming back to the same thing, you can't be too clear.
yeah. It's the culture. It goes
Yeah.
back to that. It goes back to what we've talked about. Customers are always going to be first. They have to be first. And building a customer centric culture that aligns with the business. We talked about, you get desperate to go after sales. There's no difference when we get desperate to go after employees. Like, I need an employee.
Right.
I'm just
Yes.
going to hire somebody, whether that employee aligns with the culture that I'm trying to build or not.
Yeah.
And that is going to ultimately just destroy the morale of your internal teams,
That's
which is
true.
then going to have a direct impact on how you come across to your customers.
Well, let's face it, unhappy people make for unhappy customers,
Absolutely.
So, and especially I think this younger generation, they're not going to stick around for 10 years, so you better have, I mean, in a way, I feel like millennials really started this trend of, you better figure this out, because we're not going to stick around if we don't. People, they want to feel valued, they want to feel like they matter. And that doesn't mean you're giving them the keys to the kingdom. It means that they feel like there's some place for them, where their views are aligned with what's happening, and they also have to feel like what you're doing is not hurting the world. And I think that's not a bad thing that Gen Zers are bringing into this. I see that because I have 2 Gen Zers myself, so so I definitely see that. It's like, yeah, I don't think I want to stick around here. Really? Okay.
Yeah.
Maybe just get the experience.
Yeah.
It's a whole different world. It really
Oh,
is.
yeah, I totally is.
It makes me laugh sometimes.
How can people find you?
So, right, they can go to my website, zeewybrands.com. They can find me on LinkedIn, and I have I have tons of information there, tons of content on LinkedIn. A couple years ago, I decided to really focus on LinkedIn, especially after what's happened with Twitter, now X. I think in a way, I think X might be the right name for it, because I don't know how much longer it's going to be there. But yes, so LinkedIn and my website, zeewybrands.com.
Awesome. And there's a link, or at least a QR code up in the corner. You can scan that and get to the website fairly quickly if you want.
Great.
Thank you, Orly.
Sorry, I was just going to say one other thing. Of course, you can go to Amazon and find my book.
Yeah. So we'll pop that up one more time. So here's
Right.
the book. Also, there's another QR code right there, so you can scan that also and get to it fairly quickly. Go pick up a copy of Ready Launch Brand. Sounds like a fabulous book. I'm going to go pick up a copy because I want to go read up all the founder stories and add more stories to my collection. So,
there's a couple good ones in there I think you'll appreciate.
Yeah. Looking forward to it. Thank you again. Appreciate your time, your insights, and the conversation.
Thanks so much for having me, Chris. It's been a pleasure.
And of course, for everyone else, tune in next week. We'll be back for another episode of Customer Transformation Live with another guest. Looking forward to that conversation. And if you need anything else, track me down on my website, chrishood.com. Thank you, everyone. Appreciate it.